Yeah, on the player side, there's then that for as easy as the coaching placement is, the player placement is just anytime you bring up a school with the status and the longevity of Oklahoma, it's always going to be extremely difficult. But we got an early vote for Rocky Kalmus.
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple, at least one for sure that is a no brainer, no questions asked. Leroy Tillman is a guy that he was one of, if not the best, the most dominant defensive lineman maybe ever to play the game on the college side. So he's absolutely one that I would that I would put there. Now there's some others when you look at the running back position. I know there's a lot of recency bias in terms of that, but when you look at a guy like Billy Sims, won one Heisman Trophy, very easily could have won back to back. Just a very polarizing figure, just from Oklahoma's perspective, historic perspective. You've got guys like Joe Washington, that again was he did more. He was kind of the Reggie Bush before Reggie Bush was there, right? From a running back and kick return, punt return perspective, and then, but so like I said, so when you look at those two, it's hard to. Adrian Peterson's probably the most physically gifted, dominant player, but um his career numbers probably weren't as big as they probably could have been or should have been, just with some of the injuries that he had. So I would probably slightly lean Billy Sims as being another guy. And then when you look at the quarterback position, I I like Baker Mayfield there. I think because of his leadership ability. I mean, you've got other guys that certainly, um, that certainly could be part of that. Steve Owens, he's more of kind of from obviously from a running back. I meant to say Steve Davis, just in terms of how successful he was at the quarterback and how big of a winner he was for Oklahoma in the '70s. And then you've got other Heisman Trophy winners that have been there. You've got Jason White, you've got Sam Bradford, you've got, even though he didn't win the Heisman, you've got Landry Jones, you've got Jamel Holloway. So you've got a lot of quarterbacks, but I think Mark, for me, I would put Baker up there just because of what his numbers were, just because he was able to win the Heisman Trophy as well. I think he was very instrumental in getting Oklahoma back into the playoffs, after a little bit of a drought there. So those would be my three, and then how do you have the discussion um, of a Roy Williams versus like a Brian Bosworth? Um, those are, Brian Bosworth was a little bit certainly before my time, so it didn't really get to experience and really understand his necessarily his worth and his dominance, but he was extremely dominant at the linebacker position for Oklahoma. But then again, Roy Williams, he was probably, up until that point, he was probably the best defensive player that I had ever seen just in person for Oklahoma specifically. So I would probably maybe lean Bosworth just because of everything surrounding him, what he was about, but really just at the a very strong honorable mention to Brian Bosworth there.
Joe Washington was a little bit before my time as a college player, but I caught him. I remember Joe Washington during a number of NFL games, and one in particular on a Monday night when he was with the Colts. And he had, just one of those nights where he had kick returns all over the place, pass receptions, and just it was in the rain, I believe, against the Patriots. And that was my introduction to Joe Washington. I've got Adrian Peterson's numbers up there from his days at Oklahoma. I've got a site pulled up. I will give them credit in just a second as soon as I can find that. But they've got a list of 50 players. Let me get your thoughts on this one. Well, I'll just read it off here. Number 1, Leroy Tillman. 2 is Billy Sims. 3 is Steve Owens. 4, Roy Williams. Sam Bradford at 5. Billy Wessels at 6. Tony Casillas at 7. Tommy McDonald 8. Jamal Brown at 9. Joe Washington 10. Kurt Barris at 11. We've got Adrian Peterson 12. Brian Bosworth 13. Jerry Tubbs 14. Keith Jackson 15. Rod Schoth 16. Jason White 17. At number 18, Rocky Kelmus. Jack Mildren 19. Derek Strait. Zach Henderson. Granville Liggins. Tommy Harris. Greg Roberts. Dewey Selman. Greg Pruitt. Daryl Hunt. DeMarco Murray. Teddy Lehman. Josh Heupel at 30. George Cumby. Ricky Bryan. Jim Weatherall. Gerald McCoy. Carl McAdams. Mark Clayton. Anthony Phillips. Mike Vaughn. Lucius Selman. It's crazy, 3 of them. Paul Buddy Burris. Jackie Shipp. Remember him. Ralph Neely. Anthony Perkins. Darnell Royal. Reggie Kinlaw. Trent Williams. Jimbo Elrod. Rufus Alexander. Mark Hudson. And JT Thatcher. Gave you a lot of names there.
Yeah.
Anybody jump out?
Yeah, when you look at, I mean, I think Billy Vessels is one of those that's in the conversation. Just for me in terms of top 4. I mean, it just, it's so much depending on what you feel like is your criteria there. Do you think about just what they were at Oklahoma? Do you think about what they were able to accomplish in the NFL? As part of that, I think if you're looking at the running back position and you're looking at combined college and NFL, then I think Adrian Peterson is your number 1, without a doubt. But again, you had it up there on the list. He missed, he still ran for 1,000 yards, but he missed 5 games, I believe, which would have been his junior year at that point. So I think that's one thing. And then you've got Billy Sims here on the list. To just really got significant amount of playing time in his last 2 years. Had over 3,200 yards in those 2 years, 42 touchdowns in those last 2 years, of which he could have very easily won back-to-back Heisman trophies. So yeah, I think it's there's, like I said, there's a few of those that kind of come to fruition in terms of what your thoughts are. But when you look at Jason White's numbers, for his career, I mean, a majority of those are, again, very much like Billy Sims over his last couple of years, but very, very dominant. But stats are a little bit difficult to look at. Obviously, they're big for the people that we didn't necessarily have an opportunity. But if you look at stats alone, Landry Jones is the leading passer in Oklahoma football history, and I think a lot of people wouldn't really have him in their top 3 or 4. Just just in terms of overall, quarterbacks that in Oklahoma history. But he has the best
He
stats
threw it
because
to the other guys a few times.
he did, yeah. And I think that's always been the difference maker for me, is between him and Bradford and Baker Mayfield and some of the other ones. I mean, I think, an argument could have been made for Kyler Murray if he had more than one year as a starter. I think his 1 year was probably the best 1 year that any quarterback has had at the University of Oklahoma. You can almost make the same argument for Jalen Hurts. Had an outstanding year at Oklahoma in his senior year, but just had that 1 year. When you look at Kyler's combined rushing
Oh man. Yeah.
and passing, but then when you look at Jalen Hurts, I mean, he had more total yards in his 1 year at Oklahoma than Kyler Murray or
Hmm.
Baker Mayfield did. When you take into the rushing yardage as well. So it's all in the eye of the beholder. But I would still go just for his career. Would probably still go Baker Mayfield and then the other ones that I'd mentioned: Billy Sims, Leroy Tillman, and Brian Bosworth.
Kyler Murray had 54 total touchdowns. Hurts had 52. Wow. It's a lot of points. So, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And again, a lot of these careers, I try to narrow it down to just what they did in college. If we're talking about a particular school and their best all-time players, I don't care if the player we're talking about never played a game in the NFL, never gained a yard. I'm solely focused on what they did as a college player. A lot of people are influenced by, whether the particular player was a bust at the next level or whether they took off and became an all-time great, like an Adrian Peterson. So that obviously plays a factor in our bias for sure.
Yep. No, absolutely. And then, like I said, there's a ton of different ways to look at that. Like you exactly like you'd mentioned. With guys like Jalen Hurts. I mean, he's still young in his career, but if we did this, I don't know if we did this 8 or 9 years from now, and he continues to have a very solid year after year All Pro, MVP type of seasons, then yeah, he might be someone that you think about further up on that list.
Right, folks, we appreciate you being here at the Voice of College Football for our Oklahoma show that we deliver each and every week here at the Voice of College Football. We changed it up this week just based on schedules, so that's one of the reasons why we would ask that you would, of course, like the video, but also subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Trey Sermon. We're going down the list a little bit, but that's okay. He was obviously really good, but look at Trey Sermon's numbers. Of course, he had some of his biggest games at Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about not even 1,000-yard season at Oklahoma. He did score 17, 22, 24, 20, 25 touchdowns in a career at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So really good player. And again, he finished with a flurry at Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game and the college football playoff. But yeah, nice player.